Day 9. Jeremiah 23:6. In his days Judah shall be saved, and Israel shall dwell safely. And this is his name whereby he shall be called, the Lord our righteousness. While shepherds watch their flocks by night, all seated on the ground, the angel of the Lord came down, and glory shone around. Fear not, said he, for mighty dread had seized their troubled minds. Glad tidings of great joy I bring to you and all mankind. To you in David's town this day is born of David's line the Savior, who is Christ the Lord, and this shall be the sign. The heavenly babe you there shall find, to human view displayed, all meanly wrapped in swaddling bands, and in a manger laid. Thus spake the seraph, and forthwith appeared a shining throng of angels praising God, who thus addressed their joyful song. All glory be to God on high, and on the earth be peace. Goodwill henceforth from heaven to men begin and never cease. Okay, so now the story. This is an old story called Why, excuse me, Why the Chimes Rang by Raymond MacDonald Alden. There was once in a faraway country where few people have ever traveled, a wonderful church. It stood high on a hill in the midst of the great city. And every Sunday, as well as on sacred days like Christmas, thousands of people climbed the hill to its great archways, looking like lines of ants, all moving in the same direction. When you came to the building itself, you found stone columns and dark passages and a grand entrance leading to the main room of the church. At one corner of the church was a great gray tower with ivy growing over it as far up as one could see. Now all the people knew that at the top of the tower was a chime of Christmas bells. They had hung there ever since the church had been built and were the most beautiful bells in the world. Some thought it was because a great musician had cast them and hung them carefully in their place. Others said it was because of the great height, which reached up where the air was clearest and purest. However that might be, no one who had ever heard the chimes denied that they were the sweetest in the world. Some described them as sounding like angels far up in the sky, others as sounding like strange winds singing through the trees. But the fact was that no one had heard them for years and years. There was an old man living not far from the church who said that his mother had spoken of hearing them when she was a little girl, and he was the only one who was as sure of as much as that. There were Christmas chimes, you see, and they were not meant to be played by men or on common days. It was the custom on Christmas Eve for all the people to bring to the church their offerings to the Christ child. And when the greatest and best offering was laid on the altar, there used to come sounding through the music of the choir the Christmas chimes far up in the tower. Some said that the wind rang them, and others that they were so high that the angels were the ones who set them swinging. But for many long years, they had never been heard. It was said that people had been growing less careful of their gifts for the Christ child, and that no offering was brought great enough to deserve the music of the chimes. Every Christmas Eve, the rich people still crowded to the altar, each one trying to bring some better gift than any other without giving anything that he wanted for himself. And the church was crowded with those who thought that perhaps the wonderful bells might be heard again. But although the service was splendid and the offerings plenty, only the roar of the wind could be heard far up in the stone tower. Now, a number of miles from the city, in the little country village, where nothing could be seen of the great church but glimpses of the tower, when the weather was fine, lived a boy named Pedro and his little brother. They knew very little about Christmas chimes, but they had heard of the service in the church on Christmas Eve and had a secret plan, which they had often talked over when by themselves, to go see the beautiful celebration. "Nobody can guess, little brother," Pedro would say, "all the fine things there are to see and hear. And I've even heard it said that the Christ child sometimes comes down to bless the service. What if we could see him?" The day before Christmas was bitterly cold, with a few lonely snowflakes flying in the air. The hard white crust on the ground crunched under their feet. Pedro and little brother were able to slip quietly away early in the afternoon, and although the walking was hard in the frosty air, by nightfall they had trudged so far hand in hand that they saw the lights of the big city just ahead of them. Indeed, they were about to enter one of the great gates in the wall that surrounded it when they saw something dark in the snow near the path and stepped aside to look at it. It was a poor woman who had fallen just outside the city, too sick and tired to get in, where she might have found some shelter. The soft snow made of a drift a sort of pillow for her, and she would soon be so sound asleep in the wintry air that no one would ever waken her again. All this Pedro saw in a moment, and he knelt down beside her and tried to rouse her, even tugging at her arm as though he would have tried to carry her away. He turned her face toward him so that he could rub some of the snow on it, and when he had looked at her silently a moment, he stood up again and said, "It's no use, little brother. You will have to go on alone." "Alone? And you not see the Christmas festival?" "No." Pedro could not help keeping back a choking sound in his throat. "See this poor woman? Her face looks like the Madonna in the chapel window. She will freeze to death if nobody cares for her. Everyone has gone to the church now, but when you come back, can you bring someone to help? I will rub her to keep her from freezing, perhaps get her to eat the bun that is left in my pocket." "Oh, but I cannot bear to leave you and go on alone," said little brother. "Both of us need not miss the service. It had better be I than you. You can easily find your way to the church, and you must see and hear everything twice, little brother, once for you and once for me. I am sure the Christ child must know how I should love to come with you and worship him. Oh, if you get a chance, little brother, slip up to the altar without getting in anyone's way. Take this little silver piece of mine and lay it down for my offering when no one is looking. Do not forget where you have left me, and forgive me for not going with you." In this way, he hurried little brother off to the city and winked hard to keep back the tears as he heard the crunching footsteps sounding farther and farther in the twilight. It was pretty hard to lose the music and splendor of the Christmas celebration that he had been planning for so long and spent the time instead in that lonely place in the snow. The great church was a wonderful place that night. Everyone said it never looked so bright and beautiful. When the organ played and the thousands of people sang, the walls shook with the sound, and little Pedro, way outside the city wall, felt the ground tremble. At the close of the service came the procession with the offerings to be laid on the altar. Rich men, great men, marched proudly up to lay down their gifts to the Christ child. Some brought wonderful jewels, baskets of gold, so heavy they could scarcely carry them down the aisle. A great writer laid down a book he'd been making for years and years, and last of all walked the king of that country, hoping with all the rest to win for himself the chime of the Christmas bells. There went a great murmur through the church as the people saw the king take from his head the royal crown, all set with precious stones, and lay it gleaming on the altar as his offering to the Holy Child. Surely we'll hear the bells now, for nothing like this has ever happened before. But still only the cold old wind was heard in the tower, and the people shook their heads, and some of them said, as they had before, they never really believed the story of the chimes and doubted if they had ever rung at all. The procession was over. The choir began the closing hymn. Suddenly the organist stopped playing as though he had been shot. Everyone looked at the old minister, who was standing by the altar, holding up his hand for silence. Not a sound could be heard from anyone in the church, but as all the people strained their ears to listen, there came softly and distinctly, swinging through the air, the sound of the chimes in the tower. So far away and yet so clear the music seemed. So much sweeter were the notes than anything that had been heard before, rising and falling away up there in the sky, that the people in the church sat for a moment as still as though something held each of them by the shoulders. Then they all stood up together and stared straight at the altar to see what great gift had awakened the long, silent bells. But all that the nearest of them saw was the childish figure of little brother, who had crept softly down the aisle when no one was looking, and had laid Pedro's little piece of silver on the altar. I hope we can find ways to sacrifice for each other this year at Christmas. It's coming. It's coming. It'll be here very soon. Today's day 10. Please go out and sacrifice for someone. It's like you're doing it for Jesus.